happy hour. We'll be able to do our West LA Democratic Club happy hour in person, which would be lovely to have some nice discussion. As I've been doing, since this hideous war in Ukraine began so long ago now, I always want to start our meetings with a little moment of silence, something to reflect upon and give gratitude ourselves for what we have, that we are able to be here. We're not having bombs raining on us. We want to send positive energy out to the Ukrainians, to all the Sudanese, to all the people in the world who are suffering senselessly, usually for just greed and power. So I'd like you to join me for these few minutes of silence now. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and send out loving thoughts to the world with deep, deep gratitude. About 10 seconds. Thank you. Oh, okay, thank you, and appreciate that. And Shabbat Shalom to all of you who observe. Okay, so I don't think George Gascon really needs much introduction. We just know him as a really progressive champion in this district attorney's office. He's done more, I think, than we've ever had here in Los Angeles, for sure. And around the country, he is really honored. So I would like George to just come start, because you don't have so much time. And let's just give him a big round of applause for George Gascon.
Thank you. Thank you, Kara. And thank you all for making the time. What I like to do is I like to very quickly go through our midterm report. It's hard to believe, but I've been in office now actually almost 2.5 years. And I want to kind of go over this, which, by the way, if any of you is interested in getting the entire thing, you could go into our website, you can get a link, and it's all there. And then I want to open it up. I want to touch upon some of the questions that I believe that were given to Kara, but Kara, if I forget any of them, please make sure that I don't, and then any other questions that you may have. But let me just very quickly give you an update, because I think the update will actually answer some of your questions, and the ones that we don't will obviously take on separately. Let me begin with accountability and charging practices. There has been a tremendous amount of discussion about what we're doing in terms of our efforts to hold people accountable, and I think that that's an important conversation. And we're looking at the first 2 years of administration and kind of looking back and comparing to previous years of the prior administration. So when it comes to felonies, we're charging about 50% of the cases that are presented by the police. Interestingly enough, that has been a very consistent charging rate for the office since around 2010. So the office, basically before Jackie Lacey, during Jackie Lacey, and now under my administration, we're charging at roughly around 50% of the felonies get presented to the office. Probably the biggest difference between the way that we're doing business and the way that Lacey and other administrations were doing is, for instance, we don't seek the death penalty. So if we have a case that is what we call special circumstances, we seek life without the possibility of parole, but we have taken death penalty off the table. The other thing is that overall, we're not seeking as lengthy of sentencing as prior administrations, where we're seeking regularly 40, 50, 80, 100 years, even more. I mean, we have many cases of 140 years or more. We generally have tailored that down to a lower amount of years, but nevertheless, people are going to prison for decades. They're just not going to prison for as long as they did in the past. That really is the only basic difference when it comes to felonies. Now, misdemeanors, and here's one thing that I want to underline. For those of you that live in the city of Los Angeles, and many of you that live in the city of Santa Monica, for instance, or Torrance, we do not prosecute misdemeanors in the city of Los Angeles. So when you're looking at misdemeanor conduct, you need to understand that regardless of what people tell you about my policy, it doesn't impact you because that is done by the LA City Attorney. Okay. But having said that, I think it's important that you know overall what our practices are. And we looked at misdemeanor charges, and we looked at it, the office actually since about 2019, which was 2 years before I became the DA, had a reduction that went from around 80% to around 60% charging rate of misdemeanors. And when we look at our charging rate for misdemeanors, it's consistent with one exception. But let me get to where we're consistent. When it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to driving under the influence, when it comes to assaults, when it comes to theft, when it comes to vandalism, we're charging those and seeking dispositions that are very consistent with what prior administrations were doing. Now, here's where the difference comes in. When it comes to crimes of addiction, so people that are under the possession of drugs for personal use, people that are related to homeless related incidents, like, you know, they may be blocking a sidewalk and under the influence of drugs, so they have mental health problems, we try to divert those cases. So you would see, and if you look at our midterm report, you will see that the graph, when it comes to those charges, there will be a drop. That is correct. And the reason is because we are diverting them. We're looking for alternatives to incarceration for people that are drug addicted, people that have mental health issues, but not those that are also involving other crimes, such as domestic violence or driving under the influence and assaulting others. Those continue to be pretty much what it has been in the past. Again, we try to be more creative sometimes in how we dispose of the case, but the cases are being charged. Another thing that we started to do is when I run for office, I talked about it, and there was a lot of conversations around wanting our office to do more restorative justice. And for those of you that are not familiar with restorative justice, very quickly, it's a victim-centered approach where you actually bring the victim to the place. And assuming that the victim agrees, by the way, the victim has to agree. If he or she doesn't, it goes through the regular court process. But if they agree, then what happens is we bring the offender or the accused. The accused has to also agree to assume responsibility. In other words, if the accused says, I'm not guilty, we don't do restorative justice, because if you're not guilty, then your place is in court, because then you should be able to prove that you're not guilty. But if we have an accused person that agrees that they committed the alleged crime and the victim agrees, what we do is we use trained facilitators, and then the focus is in how to repair the harm for the victim, in how to hold the person that committed the harm accountable. But in that process of holding the person accountable, and we're doing the reparation to the victim, we also try to look for ways to deal with the underlying causes of what prompted this person to cause the harm. So often we will look at mental health issues, we will look at housing issues, we may look at a bunch of other things, and we try to work with other partners to make sure that we try to fix or address those things at the same time that we're addressing the harm that was caused to the victim. We started that program with 14 to 17-year-olds, and we call the program Ready. And we're working in partnerships with organizations like Homeboys Industry and several other nonprofits that have a lot of experience in the space. We're looking to move this into what we call the transitional age youth, which is 18 to 25. And eventually my goal 2 years down the line is to put it across the board. And again, victim has to agree, the accused has to accept that they committed the offense and they accept responsibility. And obviously this doesn't apply to crimes of violence. This is more the lower level types of crime. The other thing that we're doing around restorative justice has to do with hate crimes. We have seen a tremendous increase in hate crimes since 2016, and especially since around 2019, 2020. I think most of us understand that during the Trump administration, there was a huge jump because the president himself often talked in terms that gave license to be hateful, right? He referred to, immigrants, especially from Latin America, as rapists and murderers. He talked about COVID later on as a Kung Fu flu. When there were white supremacist events, he would say, well, they're all good people. So, all the things actually, I don't think they created new levels of hate, but what it does, it is allowed hate to be front and center. It gave a license for people to be hateful. And consequently, we saw a tremendous increase in hate, anti-Semitism, hate against African Americans, hate against LGBTQ plus community, the AAPI community, you name it, we have seen it. The problem is that when the hate leads to a violent crime, we have good tools to deal with that. And we prosecute those cases, and actually our filing rate against this case is about 86%. It's one of the highest rate that we have of any of the work that we do. The state average is around 50%. But there are many other incidents that are lower level incidents, misdemeanor level, that the tools are very inadequate. And what we have done and work with a nonprofit, and we work with actually a lot of our interfaith partners, especially in the Jewish community and the African American community, we have taken and created a restorative justice program for this lower level hate crimes. Again, this is only in parts other than the city of LA, because LA, remember, that's the city attorney. But what we have done is we taken kind of similar to the work that we're doing in Ready for juveniles, but we actually bring, and again, if the victim agrees and the offender admits that he or she committed the crime, we bring this into a restorative justice process, but it actually includes a heavy amount of work around understanding the impact of hate on communities. It becomes very tailored depending on what the hate was. So if it was anti-Semitic, we actually work with people in the Jewish community. If it's anti-African American, we work with members of the African American community that have been trained for this, or LGBTQ, we do the same thing. So by the time that the individual meets all the requirements of the settlement, because we call it a settlement, they have been exposed to a tremendous amount of education that hopefully will eliminate future similar behavior. And what we hope to do is reduce the likelihood of continuing increasing conduct. We got a grant for that. It's become a model, and we're very, it's still in the infancy stages. We have been in it for a year, but it seems to be working well, and the hope is that we will continue to grow on this. When it comes to law enforcement accountability, this is an area that a lot of people talked about. It was one of the main components of my platform and how I got elected. And I have to tell you that we have way exceeded anything that happened in the past. Under the Cooley administration, for instance, there were no prosecutions for uses of force in 12 years against police officers. Under Jackie Lacey, there was one. We now have in excess of 10 prosecutions for excessive force, including shootings, but we actually in total, and I'm talking about not off-duty conduct, but conduct of under the color of authority, committing perjury. We filed 23 cases in 2021 and 21 cases in 2022. And I can tell you that 2023 is already moving at a much higher rate as our unit has become more adept to the work, and also because we're requiring also something that was not required before. All law enforcement agencies now have to fully comply with the Brady requirements. And for those of you who are not familiar, prosecutors under the law, and this is federal law that has been established for many years, were required to provide the defense any information that may be exculpatory as to prosecution witnesses, which includes law enforcement. So for instance, if an officer has a history of making racist remarks or a history of lying under oath, all the things have to be released to the defense. We now have a system that requires that be done, which was never done. And that also has brought in some of the perjury cases. Wage theft. This is another area that I committed very clearly when I run for office. In our county, we have millions and millions of dollars that are stolen from workers every year. And one of the things that you have to think when there is a wage theft incident, it's not only the individual and his or her family and community that are losing that income, but the other part of it is that the employers, those other businesses that play by the rules, and they're paying overtime, and they're paying workers' comp, and they're doing all the things they're required to do, they are placed under a competitive disadvantage. And often when you're talking about construction work or work where people are bedding for work, these individuals that are not paying their full share are underbedding the employers that are doing business by the book. And they're costing those businesses to lose income. And so it's impacting the worker, it's impacting their family and community, but it's also impacting the business community. And we partner with the labor commissioner. We now have an MOU. We're working also with the Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. We recently put a case against Pacific Commercial Corporation, which is one of the largest janitorial services in the county. They service a lot of the large buildings. And we had, I want to say somewhere around 20 victims that came forward, major case. And we're looking at a whole bunch of other cases. So this is moving forward at a really good clip. Concerning immigration, our county has somewhere around 45 to 50% of the residents of our county are immigrants, either from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, and other parts of the world. We often see that immigrants are very reluctant to come forward and cooperate with the police because they're afraid that either the person or a relative or a neighbor may end up being arrested and deported because somebody in the nucleus has no documents. There are actually Supreme Court rules that require prosecutors and police to not only not take immigration into consideration when you're dealing with victims and witnesses of crime, but more importantly, that we offer them a path through what is called a U visa or a T visa. U visa are for those that cooperate with authorities or become a witness or report a crime. T visas are for those that are being human trafficked, which we know that we have a lot of labor, human traffic, as well as prostitution. We're required, if the person is cooperating, to certify the person so they can then go to the federal authorities, Homeland Security, and then Homeland Security finally determines whether the person is going to get the visa or not. But if they do, they actually get to regularize temporarily their stay here, and it gives them the opportunity to cooperate. That is a rule that was often being violated in this office, as well as many other DAs. We put a model policy in place, and in that process, we have members of the assembly come and say, hey, what about if we make this a state law? And we say, absolutely, it will be wonderful because there are 57 other counties that are not doing this. Or maybe I shouldn't say 57, there are 2 or 3 that are, but most are not. So we now have legislation that is running through the assembly, and we believe that it's going to pass that will codify this, and it will become a model, and it will be state law. When it comes to victim services, one of the things that when I came into office, we realized that this was an area that we were truly lacking in the way we were serving victims. And there were multiple things that were going on. Number one, we're terribly understaffed. Number two, the belief within the office, which is often happens in many prosecutors' office, the way you can serve a victim is just simply by having the victim come in, be a witness, and you prosecute the case to the greatest extent possible. But very little thought was given to the trauma and in providing trauma-informed care. So we did several things. Number one, the unit used to be run by an attorney. Frankly, I'm not an expert in how to deal with mental health issues, the impact of social complexities, but there are people that are trained to do that. So we did a nationwide search. We wound up hiring a manager. Interestingly enough, we did a nationwide search, wound up hiring somebody that worked for the Department of Public Health here in the county. She has a master's in counseling and also a master's in sociology. And she was hired over a year ago. She's brought a tremendous amount of energy to the work. We've hired since then 16 additional victim services representatives. We have increased the budget of this unit. We have created a mass victimization crisis response team, which, by the way, has become a state model. And for the first time, it was deployed during the mass shooting at Monterey Park. They were there for days. We have now increased the number of victims that we've served. Since I've been in office, we've served about 35,000 victims. We have done over 12 forums for community providers. And we created a victims advisory board composed of men and women that have been the victims of violent crime in different components, anywhere from sexual assault to having members of their family being murdered. And they have helped us in shaping the way that we're doing this work. Sexual assaults was another area that I talked a great deal about. I'm sure that you saw the Weinstein case. That was, obviously a major case that had been already in place before I came into office. But there have been other cases. For instance, we recently got a conviction on Dr. Heap. He was the UCLA doctor that probably molested hundreds of women over many years. We also got a conviction of Mr. Turner, who was a high school therapist that was molesting young girls in high school. We're working in many of these cases that were sort of languishing, and will continue to do so. I know I'm going really fast, but I only have a few more areas to go, and then we'll open up for the questions. Exonerations and resentencing. This is an area also that we talk a great deal about. There were many cases where people were claiming that our office had wrongfully convicted them and they were not being attended. And I'm going to highlight two of those cases for you. One is a gentleman by the name of Maurice Hastings. Maurice Hastings did 38 years in prison. He was convicted of murder and rape. He actually was tried 3 times. The office tried to try him for the death penalty, a capital case, twice. The jury hung. And then on the 3rd try, they took the death penalty out and the jury convicted him. From the very beginning, he asserted that he was innocent. He was never heard. 18 years into his prison term, as the DNA technology started to get better and better, he requested that the office test the DNA samples that were taken from the victim of the homicide and rape. And he was told by the office twice, once under Cooley, once under Lacey, that the DNA had disappeared, that had been destroyed. When I came into office, I was approached again by the Innocence Project. We actually did our due diligence, found the rape kits, had it tested, and actually the DNA came back to another person, not this man. That person actually went on to rape another woman after this rape and murder that Mr. Hastings had been accused. He wound up in prison. Actually, he died in prison a couple of years ago now. But Mr. Hastings was completely innocent, yet he did 38 years in prison, including about 20 of those after he had repeatedly requested the DNA be tested, and he was told that it had been destroyed. We have another one. We have Mr. Torres. Mr. Torres was 16 years old when he was accused of murdering somebody in a drive-by shooting. He always asserted his innocence. His mother actually said at the time that the shooting occurred, Mr. Torres was having dinner with a family. Again, the office ignored much of the evidence that was being presented. After 20 years in prison, we were able to look at the case. We did some further investigation and found out that, in fact, he was not the murderer, that someone else was the murderer. This is a man that went to prison, actually a 16-year-old that went to prison, did 20 years. He was released last year. Fentanyl. We all are talking, we hear about fentanyl and the incredible destruction that is causing nationwide and in our own community. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure is that we did not only the prosecution side, which is important that we do, especially for traffickers, but I wanted to avoid the mistakes of the 80s and 90s when the war on drug was raging and we put a lot of people in prison and jail, but never really dealt effectively with this. So I talked to Dr. Ferrer, she's the head of our county health department, because they had done a study about fentanyl consumption in the county, which is really counter to what the usual narrative that you hear, that kids are using fentanyl at this great rates. They are, by the way, but not at the rates. Actually, most of the fentanyl use are adults, and most of the people that are dying from fentanyl overdose are adults. And we put together a working group. We brought in law enforcement, including the county chiefs of police, LAPD, and the sheriff. But we brought in also the health department. We brought in families of victims, of members in the family that died from fentanyl overdose. and we have brought in other nonprofits, and we basically have taken a three-legged approach, if you will. We're doing the enforcement, we're going aggressively after the traffickers, but we're also doing education. So we're working through the schools, and we're working through community centers, and we're doing prevention by increasing the availability of harm reduction things such as Narcan and other preventive measures that can help people to ensure that we protect people from dying. I already talked about hate crime, so I won't go into this anymore. We've done a lot of work in this. We have created a community violence interdiction team. Often, especially, and this is not so much the case with the LAPD, but we have to remember there are 88 cities in the county. There are 46 police departments. Once you take the LAPD and the LA County sheriffs out of the way, departments start to get very small. And sometimes they don't have the resources to deal with chronic, sort of organized crime type of thing, where you have people that are repeatedly damaging or harming the community. We have created a team. It's kind of a strike team of both investigators and lawyers that when chiefs of police or cities request us, we go in and we actually work hand in hand with the local police and local community and deal with the problem. And we have gone after serial burglars, we have gone after serial robbers, we recently have worked a bunch of cases in a thing that are called casitas, which is basically this illegal gambling houses that are popping up around the county, where people will take over a home in a neighborhood in a residential area, and they create a gambling house where, by the way, prostitution and drugs are also provided. And it really creates havoc in a residential neighborhood, because all of a sudden you got people coming and going at all times of the day. And we started to go after those, and we have been very successful in doing that work, and we'll continue to do that work. Reproduction rights. I was approached by Planned Parenthood because increasingly they're being singled out for vandalism, and and we also have other partners around the country, district attorneys and other, as some parts of the country are making it harder and harder for women to exercise their reproductive rights. Many are coming to places like California, Illinois, New York. And one of the problems that we see is that in some of the states like Texas or Oklahoma, for instance, the service providers or anybody that helps in the transportation or whatever could be prosecuted for the facilitation of the exercise of a women's choice in a place like LA. And we wanted to make sure that the women that were coming here were being protected. So we've created a lot of different work around to make sure that that occurs, at the same time that we're working in partnership with Planned Parenthood and other providers to make sure that if they are the victims of vandalism or some other criminal activity, that we have a direct line of communication. And finally, and I'll stop here with the midterm report. We have created advisory boards that are community advisory boards. I mentioned the one about victims, but we now have several others. We have one that is focusing on the African American community, one in the Latinx community, one for LGBTQ+. We have also one that is being created now for interfaith, where we're bringing in clergy from all the different major denominations that are being represented in our county. We're going to be creating a youth, and we'll continue to grow. But what this advisory boards are doing, they're coming in and directly in the areas that they have concerns, they're actually helping us develop policy and procedures for our office. The most active one has been the one involving victims, but every one of these groups is increasingly becoming more active and really having an impact on the way that we do business. So with that, I'm going to kind of stop us to the midterm. I'm going to go over one of the questions that I remember, and Carrie, you have to remind me about the others. But I know there was a question that basically, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and if I'm not doing it correctly, please correct me, but the comments were, you don't care for victims, you have stopped attending, providing victim impact statements. And that's completely incorrect. We deeply care about victims. As I mentioned before, we have actually enlarged significantly our footprint around victim services. But here's the things that I think this person was referring and what we are not doing, because we don't think it serves anyone. When there is a parole hearing it used to be a case that the office would send a prosecutor to argue against the release of the person. And generally the prosecutor would go and talk about how heinous the crime was when the crime ever occurred 10, 15, 20 years before. And that was the way that we were representing the victim. There are multiple problems with that. Number one, the parole board makes it very clear that they don't want people to relitigate the case, because the parole board is about assessing whether the person has rehabilitated or not. And then they want to hear from the victim as to how the victim feels about a release or no release. You know, many victims, by the way, don't show up. Other victims actually want their assailant to be released after decades. And some victims do not want the assailant to be released. And that is their right. And we provide victim services representatives to walk the victim through that process so they can provide the statement. But we're not going there and arguing against the release based on the behavior that has already been litigated, because actually CDCR and the parole board has told us that's not what we want. This is about dealing with what the person has done in prison. And it's a matter of fact, and this is a point that is really interesting because the people that really complain about this don't understand. Actually, if you follow the data from CDCR, that's the California Department of Corrections, when a DA goes and argues against a release versus when there is no prosecutor arguing against a release, you're more likely to be released if you have a DA arguing against your release than if you don't. And those are not my numbers. Those are the numbers of CDCR. So actually going and trying to relitigate the original case actually creates a greater likelihood that you're going to be released than if you let the parole board listen to the victim, evaluate whether the person has been rehabilitated or not, and then they get released. By the way, this is all scripted by law. So yes, we are not sending prosecutors, but it is totally incorrect that we're not presenting victims' impact statement, and it's totally incorrect that we're supporting the victims for this. In fact, we have increased the level of services to victims to a level that this office has never done. And we're not stopping there, by the way. We're actually working to increase the training and the salary, because we want to continue to attract very high quality people to do this work. And currently our victim service representatives are terribly, terribly underpaid. And that is one of the problems that the office has been plagued with for forever. And that's why there were so many vacancies when I came in. And we have aggressively worked to recruit this 14 new people that we brought in. Kara, there were other questions, and I don't remember what they were.
Well, God, thank you. Yes, there were. The question of bail, how has that worked out for you?
Thank you. So let me kind of walk you through kind of a quick course on bail, because I think I want you to understand bail first of all, and then I'm going to tell you what my personal belief about bail is. Okay, the courts set the bail, right? District attorneys don't set bail, police doesn't set bail. Every year, the Superior Court in each of the 58 counties, they set up what is called the bail schedule. And basically, it's a very mechanical process. They look at the penal code and they said, if you are arrested for this offenses, this is how much bail you need to post if you want to be released until you have your court date. And then that is handed over to police departments, to county jail. And when you get arrested, let's say you get arrested for a robbery, and if it's the first time, and these numbers are hypothetical, okay? But the detention officer in the county jail will look at it and say, oh, you were arrested for robbery first time, your bail is $50,000. Then the person can either write a check for $50,000, or they can call a bail bondsman, and in this case, that would be 10% of that. So they post a $5,000 bond. And basically what they have to do is the family will give, or the person will give the bail bonds company $5,000, which they never get back, and then they get released. Now, even if we decide not to prosecute the case because the evidence falls apart or whatever, those $5,000 are lost. And generally, poor people really lose a great deal on that. But nevertheless, that's how the system works. Now, the Supreme Court, on a case called the Humphrey case about 4 years ago, ruled that on a non-serious, non-violent case,
Right.
a court cannot put bail over and above what the person can afford. And they actually made an example in the Humphrey case, and it says, if the person can only afford $1 bail, then you shall give him a $1 bail.
Wow.
Non-serious, non-violent cases, basically the person must be released. Now, the county hasn't followed that, but what happened is COVID came in, right? And then the Judicial Council, which is the body that oversees all the courts in the state, and is run by the chief of the Supreme Court Justice of the state, they came up with the emergency bail schedule because jails were getting overcrowded. People were dying of COVID, not only the inmates, but service workers. When people were getting released, they were bringing COVID from the jail. And that was before we had vaccination and all that stuff. It was very, very, it was a tremendous crisis. The same thing was happening in prisons, but as to the jails, they set up the zero bail policy. And basically, they did several things that caused a lot of problems. Number one, they say, unless it's a serious and violent case, you will release a person with no bail, period. Okay, number two, and this is what really created the problem. Normally, we cite somebody, if you get a release on bail or you get released on your own recognizance, meaning that you sign and you say, I will come back, you sign a promise of coming back, you're generally cited back 4 weeks to come back to court. Now, understand, the DA is never playing a role in any of this, right? You get arrested by the police, you get released either on bail or under the emergency bail, you were told to come back to court. But instead of saying 30 days, because the courts were shut down, they were given 90 to 120 days. So what you did is you have people that were getting out for a crime, they were going out and committing another crime again, similar crime, they were coming back, they were getting released again, and that would go multiple times. Now, the reality is there was a very small group of people that did that, right? The majority of the people that were released on emergency bail did not commit other crimes, and they came back to court and everything was fine. But there was a small group that did reoffend multiple times, and that became kind of a boiling point. And then this was used against me because I have openly said that I am against cash bail. Now, here's what I mean when I say I'm against cash bail. I don't believe that the amount of money that you have in the bank should determine whether you get out of jail or not if you committed a crime. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, if you commit a crime and you are a threat to the community or your victim, you should not be released. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You should stay in what we call preventative detention, which we can do, and you're held until your day in court. And then you have a right to a speedy trial, so all that can move very, very quickly. On the other hand, if you're not a danger to the community and you're not a flight risk, you should be released whether you have money or not. That's what I believe. That's what, by the way, many other people believe. In fact, there's several states in the union already that have a no cash bail system. I have said, I don't believe that we should use cash. It should be based on the risk. And I will continue to say that. And we will not seek bail, meaning we're not going to ask the courts for bail on cases that do not have a serious and violent crime and the person is not likely to reoffend and they're not holding another open case. But the court, the reality is that they're going to do what they're going to do. And frankly, bail is set way before we see the case, because remember, we don't get to see the case until, usually 30 days later. And during COVID, it was 3 and 4 months later. So that is what has been happening, but I know that I've been blamed often for people that get in release with no bail, because primarily there's a lack of understanding of how the system works. Also, by the way, when it comes again, if you're in the city of LA, because there were a lot of cases involving misdemeanors, I don't deal with those. Now, there was a question there also talking about people looting stores and being released. And they talk about the $950 threshold between the misdemeanor and a felony. Let me educate everyone on this. Looting a store is a felony. It doesn't matter whether you take anything or not. The dollar value is irrelevant. Also, if you go in a store and you take property by force, let's say I grab this bottle And as I'm walking out, a clerk tries to stop me, and I pull away from the clerk. I push the clerk and I run. That is not shoplifting. That is a robbery. It doesn't matter what the dollar amount is. That is a felony. A theft, like a shoplifting theft, is when you go, you put something in your pocket, nobody sees you, you walk out. And in that case, if you can do that, and if it's under $950, it's a misdemeanor. Over $950 is a felony. By the way, we used to be $450, which is a threshold that was set up in 1982. If you do the dollar comparison between now and 1982, you can see that it would be much more. Most of the red states, including Texas, Mississippi, many of those other states, actually, their misdemeanor threshold is between $1,500 and $2,000. So even at the $950 level, we're not even near close to the top. We're somewhere in the middle. At the $450, we were in the bottom of the pack, and it really wasn't accounting for the impact of inflation. And by the way, why this is important is because all this starts to clog the system, and you create more and more felonies where a felony should not be created, which has an impact on your ability to get housing, employment. I can go on and on and on. And $450 in 1982 are clearly not the same as $450 in 2023. So that really is what that adjustment was.
So are you saying then, if I can be clear, that you actually, if you do steal and aren't confronted, but all of a sudden $800 or $900 of merchandise is gone from the store after the fact, it's just a theft? It's
No,
only if you're confronted that it's a felony?
it's not just a fact, it's a misdemeanor. You can still go to jail for a year.
Okay.
Okay, misdemeanors, you can go to jail for up to a year. So it's a crime. It's just a misdemeanor crime. And in the case, again, the city of LA, then that will be prosecuted by the city attorney. So the police department will even present the case to me. By the way, it's the same thing with vandalism. It depends on the dollar amount. And that actually has been on the books for well over 30 years, 20 some years. You know, if it's a felony vandalism, it comes to my office. If it's a misdemeanor vandalism, it goes to the city attorney. So like if somebody scratches your car, you know, paint some graffiti on your wall, more than likely that's going to be a misdemeanor vandalism. That goes to the city attorney.
Okay. The thing that came up that several people asked was about trying a juvenile as an adult, or not trying a juvenile as an adult when it was really a serious crime. And what came up was the case where that almost 18-year-old young man killed his ex-girlfriend and her sister and set their apartment on fire.
Yeah.
And yeah, so can you go into that for a sec?
Yeah, I can. Actually, I'm really glad that you bring that case, because that case really illustrates how the law has evolved, right? So it is absolutely correct that I have said that I don't believe in prosecuting juveniles as adults. And that was one of the cases that when I first got elected, I said, look, I'm looking at this case as a juvenile. This case should go to juvenile court.
Oh, okay.
Said that in the process of this, we have created an executive team that reviews very serious cases involving juveniles to determine whether exceptions should be made, because the crime is so heinous that perhaps the young person should be looked upon as an adult. Right. And they look actually at the way that the crime occurred, was the pre-planning, you know, whether it was a very sophisticated level in the crime. So in the case that you talk about, Kara, actually that committee looked at the case and they said, well, this young man, after he committed the murders, he actually set the place on fire. And he actually tried to disguise his identity. So there was a lot of sophistication on it. So the group that we call JACE, which is basically a group of executives in the office, by the way, they work independently of me, and the decisions, I respect them. I don't interfere with them. They made the decision that this case should be prosecuted as an adult. Okay. Yeah, but let me take you to the next step. We go to juvenile court. And because we're required by law, and this is something also that if you talk to a prosecutor a few years ago, the DA could go on what is called a direct filing. The DA could go directly into adult court without doing anything else and put a juvenile into adult court. That is not the law anymore. You have to have a hearing in juvenile court, and the juvenile judge has to agree to transfer the case.
Hmm.
So our committee says this case should be tried as an adult. We went in front of a juvenile judge in Inglewood. Juvenile judge looked at the law, looked at the consequences, and denied the transfer, meaning that the juvenile has to stay in juvenile court.
Wow.
Now, I have to tell you, I'm not saying this to criticize the judge, because the judge actually looked at all the factors in the law. And one of the things that you have to do as a judge before you transfer a juvenile to adult court today is you have to be able to establish that the juvenile has no way of being rehabilitated in the juvenile system.
Hmm.
And in this particular case, the juvenile probation have been working with the juvenile because he's been in custody now for several years, because the case originated actually under Jackie Lacey. And then I came in, and the juvenile report, the juvenile probation report actually said this juvenile is rehabilitatable. And the judge looked at that, and the judge decided that under the law, he could not transfer the case. And he was critical of my office. He said, you know, this case should not have been presented for a transfer. And I think he's right. But nevertheless, we tried to transfer this juvenile because we believe, and when I say we believe, I'm talking about the office, the people that review this. This is such a heinous case that it should perhaps go the other way. The judge disagreed. So I think it's important for people to understand that the capacity to transfer juveniles to adult court today is extremely limited. And it's extremely limited, by the way, for good reasons.
Yeah.
Like adults, juveniles, you can reprogram a juvenile brain, you know, with the right level of intervention. There's plenty of science behind this. Our brains as human beings are not fully developed until we're into our mid-20s. And there's plenty of science that shows that with the right level of trauma-informed intervention, you can take a juvenile's life and you can turn it around. You also have to look at the alternative. When we send a juvenile into adult prison, as this county used to do by the hundreds every year before the laws changed and under the prior administration, generally what happens is 95% of the people we send to prison are going to get out of jail or prison, right? Our prisons are not a place to rehabilitate people. You know, they're just not designed to rehabilitate. Unfortunately, they're designed purely to punish. You take a 16, a 17-year-old, you give them 20 years, you give them 15 years in prison. They come out, they're in their late 20s, they're in their mid-30s. They have now been living in a very hardcore environment where violence is a daily occurrence, where mental health problems are prevalent, where drug use and abuse is very, very prevalent. And you bring them out after they have been spending time in this university of crime, and you give them $200 and you tell them to go back home, report to their parole officer in a week, and go figure it out for yourself. They have no employable skills. Even if they have working skills, they can't find employment because nobody wants to hire them. They have no housing. They generally have mental health problems. And they're usually addicted to drugs. And you put all that together, and what you have is a recipe for disaster. They end up living on our sidewalks, and these are the people that sometimes, you walk by, they're giving you a look, and this thing, you know, they're assaulting somebody. What we're trying to do, we're trying to reinvent this. Actually, we're working with the Amity Foundation. We're working with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. We're actually creating a seamless reentry program that when people are being released from prison, we like to catch them at the gates. We bring them into a residential program that is usually anywhere from 12 to 18 months, where they get reintegration in society training, but they also are getting mental health services. They're getting job training. They're dealing with they have a substance abuse problem. Yeah. They're also being reconnected with their families, and they're having housing available for that period of time. And the data is starting to come. And I can tell you that, for instance, in the case of the Amity Foundation, the recidivism cases of the people that go through the Amity reentry program are somewhere around 12%, meaning about 88% do not reoffend. When you look at the rest of our cases, we have about a 70% rate of recidivism. So the reality is that there are better ways to do this work, but we got to make sure that we do it. And that's what I'm pushing for. And that's what I'm hoping that we continue to get to a place. And I have to say, we have a board of supervisors right now that is trying really hard. We have, Supervisor Mitchell, Supervisor Horvath, Supervisor Solis, and Hunt. They're working really hard. So we're getting to a much better place. And then, we have a new mayor in the city of LA. We have, a whole group of new council members. So there's a lot of things that are happening that I truly believe that 4 or 5 years from now, we're going to be looking at some of this in our rearview mirror. We'll have other problems, but I don't think we're going to have the acuteness of the problems that we have today. By the way, and this is another thing that I like to put out there for all of you, because we just came out of a 2 years horror story of a pandemic, and everything got thrown out of whack.
Yeah.
Year to date, felonies and violence in the county and in the city of LA are dropping at a very rapid rate. We believe that we have sort of ended the displacement, the big displacement of the epidemic. And I think that we're beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel. And that's already showing in what the numbers look like.
Well, like,
Wow.
this is really,
What is
for
that?
me, this is really amazing what you've been doing. I mean, I can really see why I didn't mean to be all spotlighted here.
No, that's fine.
No,
You're
on this. Now you're on it. I
be on the corner for a second, so
I can see, George, why they really called you the godfather of progressive policies, why. I mean, I'm so impressed. I'm so grateful that you are a progressive prosecutor here in Los Angeles. I think you've done an amazing job with the office. And hey, everybody, when he runs again, we're going to be out there for you again. We endorsed you the first time. Trust me, we're going to be endorsing you for the second time.
Thank you, Kara. But I like to say a quick thing, and I know that I have to leave. None of this would be possible without the support of many like you and the people in my office. I know that you hear about the outspoken opposition, but what you don't hear from is the majority of the women and men in this office are working really hard under very difficult conditions and really trying to do the right thing. And you don't hear about them because they're just grinding it every day. I could never do any of this by myself. All I can do is provide some guidance and leadership, but this is a community effort, and you guys are critical to its success for all of us.
Well, thank you, and we do our best. We really do.
You're doing it. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And well, that's it, George. So we'll give you a big round. I know it's already a minute late for your next event.
And you guys have a wonderful weekend and stay healthy, and look forward to coming back sometime soon.
Oh, you'll be back.
Great.
We'll have you back. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. And everyone, I wanted to say that we know that next year, 2024 is going to be huge, right? Because we have to take back the House, expand the Senate, our membership in the Senate, and of course, keep Joe and Kamala, as he says, to get the job done. And so we are really going to be out there having to do all this next year. So this year, we're going to take it a little easy. We're not going to be demanding so much of you. We're not demanding, but asking. Because we see what happened. Well, look what happened in Wisconsin, as I wrote in my e-letter. It was all those calls and postcards and all that really got people activated in Wisconsin. And these are things from California. So yes, we do need us to continue work. We do need to keep registering voters, but we're not going to be asking so much. We're going to give everyone a little break here and gear up for 2024, because believe me, it's going to be, a battle. And let's pray that Trump is the candidate. That's all I have to say. If Trump is the candidate,
From prison.
yeah, from prison, as Ingrid just said, we're in pretty good place. So would anyone like to say anything before we leave here? Do I see any hands? I don't know. And if not, I wish, oh, yes, Charlotte. Charlotte, unmute yourself. Charlotte, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to tell you that the Assemblywoman wants to meet with the club. And when there's available time, so we can meet next month, I guess, we're right into May. Maybe she wants to come and, say some good things to let you guys know what's going on.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know
Love
she
it.
was here in February and we love
Mhm.
her. I
Love
love my Tina.
Yeah.
I like it.
And we've been friends for almost probably 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just get with me, Carol, and so I can give it to her scheduler when we will be able to meet with her. Today was awesome to me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was awesome.
Right.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
Anybody else have anything they want to say? All welcome.
Well,
Happy hour. I'll have a drink.
Uh-huh.
Cheering y'all. Cheering y'all.
I think it's incredible work that the office is doing, and that
Wait, you're muted, but
I'm muted. Okay.
you can talk on mine.
But we could hear her on your
Okay.
microphone.
Okay, keep talking. Yeah, it is incredible.
Yeah, I think it's incredible work, and it's a thankless task. Yeah, thankless, but they're doing the right thing.
You have to shut your thing off because then we get the empty. Anyway, anybody else? Shut it off. Anybody else? Well, hi, Alan. Didn't see you there. And so thank you all. You've got to shut your yeah. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and happy May 1st on Monday. Happy May Day. I don't know what that means. But thanks again, and see you next time.
And go Lakers.
Yeah, go Lakers. Yeah.
I just wanted to say,
Yeah.
been a real pleasure to sit here watching, having this meeting and having George is outstanding.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
Yes, I agree, Ray. I was really impressed.
Yeah.
I kind of knew that, but it was really
good to hear.
good to hear, and
Yeah.
good to hear him
The
clear
detail.
up all these
Detail.
misconceptions,
Yes.
so many things, these questions that came in that were not even his purview. Some of
Yeah.
these, that's what was so interesting, that our
Exactly.
city attorney has to be prosecuting things in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, and I forgot the other city he mentioned. But I was
Torrance, I think.
really, what was it?
Torrance, I think.
Lawrence, I was really surprised at that. So, and just so many of the questions, I'm glad we recorded this.
Yeah.
It'll be going out in my next e-letter, whenever that will be. And yeah, I was really happy to hear from him, and very informed. I was taking, even though we have it on video, I was taking really copious notes as he was speaking, because yeah, really good.
Yes.
Lewis says, a pointer to the full midterm report is now on our club Facebook page.
All right.
So that's West. Is it the page, Lewis, or is it the group? It's the page, right? Which is West, and this is L.A. Democratic Club, instead of West LA, as we usually say. It's L. Facebook made us do L.A. So the whole report, his midterm report, is on our Facebook page. Thank you, Lewis. He keeps us up to date. Okay, so with that, I'll say good night. Happy weekend, and love y'all.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Get with me, Cara, please.
Yes, Charlotte, I sure will.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.